The Creole seasoning is a sodium-free and sugar-free blend that's versatile enough to put on anything. One of the first blends I developed more than 8 years ago, the Creole seasoning has an unmistakable aroma, a bold flavor, and a little heat for character. Every time I open one of these bottles, I hear trumpets and big band music.
Let's face it, shopping for insurance can be time-consuming. That's why when it comes to your auto, home, and life insurance needs, make things simple and trust the experts at Allstate. They will help you get the coverage that fits your needs while helping you bundle your life, home, and auto policies. Bundling saves you money, sure, but it also saves you time, so you can enjoy the things that matter most even more. Contact me, Tammy Haynes, your local agent, for a free personalized insurance quote. Allstate, are you in good hands?
It's like a loop machine. All around town, people trying to get down.
The human voice has always connected audiences with experiences. Major brands all across America have trusted Cover's voice time and time again. Conversational, powerhouse, intelligent, and sincere. That's the voice you need for your creative marketing process. KEAVERSVOICE.com. Cover's Voice, Cover's Voice, CoversVoice.com. Always on, all the time.
Is a premium health and wellness tea line focused on bringing delicious yet healthy tea blends to the community. Filled with an abundance of vitamins and antioxidants, we work to blend teas with exotic spices and fruits to produce scrumptious and wholesome beverages. So check us out at mymajesties.com. That's MyMajesties.com. My Majesties, an Urban Passport member.
Are you hungry for authentic Caribbean food like jerk chicken, oxtail, red snapper, shrimp, tofu, and rasta pasta? Well, find your way over to Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, 180 Auburn Avenue, right next to Royal Peacock in downtown Atlanta.
Them belly full, but we hungry.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, open daily from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. And on Friday and Saturday, we're open till 4 a.m. Come to Mango's and put some spice in your life.
Oh, we've got a good thing going.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, 180 Auburn Avenue, right next to Royal Peacock in downtown Atlanta. For more info or directions, call 404-698-3992 or log on to mangoscaribbeanrestaurant.com. For instant coupons, text MANGOS to 313131.
Tell your mama hungry, papa hungry, brother hungry.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, authentic Caribbean cuisines.
Open up the door, tell your mama hungry.
I have in me the ability to make you a better you. So if you work hard, focus, stay on point, you can do anything. Trust me.
We made this track to tell everybody they can follow their dreams.
The Cuvée Group is a Florida-based marketing and training consulting firm. We help businesses communicate to their target audience and engage them in conversation. We also help to expand their audiences, which will ultimately result in growth for those organizations. In addition to being a certified constant contact specialist, my colleagues and I are also certified in John Maxwell Leadership Principles. We use these proven principles to conduct workshops, training, and private coaching sessions for individuals and companies looking to take things to the next level. Contact us to schedule a free consultation. Issues today, don't delay, call Cuvée.
Now, you can live in Texas and not have a good red meat blend. Texas Cowboy Dust is designed for steak and other red meats. It's out to be my most popular spice blend, made with onions, peppers, ground mushrooms, pink salt, and other spices. Texas Cowboy Dust also goes great with chicken, pork, vegetables, and adds a restaurant quality sheen to gravies and sauces.
Q Time is a classic Atlanta soul food restaurant located in the historic West End. Q Time Soul Food is a family business started by Fred and Christine Crenshaw. Come on in, relax, and sink your chops into our tantalizing, mouth-watering, distinctive soul food with a twist, the Q Time way. 1120 Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard, or call your order in at 404-758-2881. Do you miss your mama's cooking? Then come on down to Q Time, an Urban Passport member.
It's like a loop machine. All around town, trying to get down. It's like a loop machine.
The Creole seasoning is a sodium-free and sugar-free blend that's versatile enough to put on anything. One of the first blends I developed more than 8 years ago, the Creole seasoning has an unmistakable aroma, a bold flavor, and a little heat for character. Every time I open one of these bottles, I hear trumpets and big band music.
Let's face it, shopping for insurance can be time-consuming. That's why when it comes to your auto, home, and life insurance needs, make things simple and trust the experts at Allstate. They will help you get the coverage that fits your needs while helping you bundle your life, home, and auto policies. Bundling saves you money, sure, but it also saves you time, so you can enjoy the things that matter most even more. Contact me, Tammy Haynes, your local agent, for a free personalized insurance quote. Allstate, are you in good hands?
It's like a loop machine. All around town, trying to get down.
The human voice has always connected audiences with experiences. Major brands all across America have trusted Kever's voice time and time again. Conversational, powerhouse, intelligent, and sincere. That's the voice you need for your creative marketing process. KeversVoice.com. Kever's Voice, Kever's Voice, KeversVoice.com. Always on, all the time.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the BCSN SportsWrap. My name is Bryan Fulford, and soon to be joining me, us will be my normal co-host, AD Drew. But joining us right now, you can see Dr. Kenyatta Conville from inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Doc, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Tell AD don't get too comfortable over there, man. You know, I'm getting hot, man. I'll take an extra job. You know, it's difficult out here for a brother.
Exactly. We all need extra jobs right now. We got all this extra time on our hands, man.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah, so AD will be coming in. AD will be coming in here shortly, and so the purpose, you know, obviously, the idea for this particular show will be definitely talking about HBCU conference realignment, which is something that my good friend AD had been working on and talking to me about for the last year. And then honestly, given all this time, he was like, all right, let me just go ahead and put these thoughts down on wax, so to speak. So, and that's what he did. And I think he's, you know, come up with some very interesting points, arguments, definitely worth discussing and debating. And so that's why we reached out to you, Doc. But before we get into that, obviously we're just a week past from the NFL draft, and the impact that it had for HBCU players has been shocking to a lot of people. I just want to start there and kind of get your thoughts on the draft results, and just what are your thoughts on what came out of it, or what are your feelings after the draft?
I was disappointed that more HBCU players didn't get drafted. Obviously, I'm quite biased as an individual that covers a great deal of HBCU football. And so I'll put that on the table. But with only one gentleman drafted into the NFL from Tennessee State in the 7th round, I was quite a bit disappointed. Obviously, he is Chavius Simmons, as he was a 7th round pick by the Bears. So I thought there could have been a lot more players that went there. I will sit up there and say that not having the HBCU draft, I mean, the combine that they initially talked about having didn't help any. So hopefully as they bring it back in the next couple of years, that will move forward in regards to having more HBCU players in the draft. Quickly, just over the last couple of years, we've seen the influx of HBCU players being drafted, and I think that was attributed to the increased quality of football, coaches coming in, as well as the recruiting frameworks as that continue to move forward, along with the Celebration Bowl closing the season broadcast on ABC, as well as to some degree the MEAC Challenge to open up the season. So it'll be interesting to look over the next year or two to see if this was just a blip in terms of that trend, or is this the trend now going back in what we would consider the wrong direction?
You know, a couple of things that I for one think, obviously after talking with, we had an interview with Damon Talbot from NFL Draft Diamonds, who's been a big supporter of HBCU players and small school players through his scouting service and his website. He kind of gave us the heads up that, you know, because of the COVID-19 pandemic and what it took away, the opportunities it took away, that he kind of gave us a heads up that it was going to be low numbers. So I don't think anyone could have predicted they were as low, although he did predict that there would only be one guy get drafted, and it turned out to be Lachavius instead of Alex Taylor, who he thought might be that one player. But I also noticed that because of the XFL, there have been 30 players that have signed NFL contracts. One player got drafted from the XFL into the NFL. And I'm wondering those 30 players might half of those spots gone to some HBCU guys, or might even be some 30 guys might have gone, say 15 to 20 might have come from small schools. I mean, there's some really good small school players, not just HBCU, but from the FCS level, that have thus far have not been drafted. So, I mean, that's another factor I think obviously with the XFL folding, not coming back next year, that's something to think about in the future. Maybe the numbers will come back. It's an optimistic thought, although I'm sort of I guess I've become sort of a negative Nancy about the draft results. What are your thoughts on just the XFLs and that angle? Yeah,
that was concerning when we talked about the XFL and what's taking place there. And we just heard due to COVID-19. So it's certainly, if it comes back and as we've seen taking off as it seemed to be, it's certainly an avenue, because we saw some players that played in there and do well that are actually now joining NFL teams as free agents. So again, any avenue that provides an additional spotlight on HBCU players to get to the top level, as many people see it, the NFL, including if that means going to the CFL, XFL, going to the HBCU combines, getting a trip to the traditional NFL combines, all those avenues, all those television eyes are avenues. The example that I would say that brings it to fruition and up to your face is the fact that you also saw where the SEC had 60 plus players. I think it was 64, one short of the record, which they set a couple of years ago with the number of draft picks that they had in the NFL. And a lot of that has to be attributed to obviously the talent that they have in the SEC, but also the idea in terms of the marketing and the broadcasting associated with the SEC and what that does to get everybody in their face. And so then you start getting in this circular effect. Is it the talent? Is it the number of times that they're on television? Or is it, as I would suggest, a combination of all those things coming together that is creating those numbers? So getting back to HBCUs, the more that they're able to be in front of people, to be able to be able to evaluate, see that talent that exists there, the more likely you're going to see that attributed to the number of draftees, obviously, as well as free agent signings, and then ultimately those players being able to make teams at the NFL level.
All right, and let me welcome in my normal co-host, AD Drew. As you can see, AD joining us. How you doing, AD?
Doing fine, my brothers. How you doing, fellas?
AD, you didn't hear me talk about the fact that I'm hungry, I'm ready to eat, and any job opportunities that come open, I'm ready to take it. So I was keeping your chair warm. So, I don't want you to take this personal, but I just let you know, just in case, brother.
Hey, we're gonna have to fight after the show then, brother, because I need me mine.
Yes, sir.
So again, as we get into this, just a reminder, as you guys are watching, we appreciate you joining us. AD Drew on Twitter, you can find him at BCSN Drew on Twitter is where you can find him. Of course, Dr. Kenyatta Conville, the host of Inside the HBCU Sports Lab, and that's where you can find him. You do that nice search on in Facebook. The show every Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern. That's 6 p.m. Central. And Doc, along with his co-host, Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, get into a lot of discussions. I think, Doc, you guys have been recently talking about the economics of HBCU sports, correct?
Correct. We like to get into the business component of that, and a lot of it is probably my fault as a sport management professor in my real life at Texas Southern University, as you all know. We developed, and I had a large component of it actually founding the sport management program at Texas Southern, the BS in sport management, as well as our Master's of Science in Sports Studies and Sports Leadership that recently came on board as well. And the final piece is working towards becoming the only HBCU with a athletic administration education doctorate, PhD in that area as well, if you would. So when we do that, we take that deep dive and let's understand what's really going on behind the scenes in terms of business. So as much as we like to engage in the week-to-week news, this time with the COVID-19 pandemic gives us an opportunity to go back to what we traditionally do in the summer part when we kind of take a back seat with college athletics. Obviously, as we get prepared for the fall season, the academic year, we take the luxury of going into the business side. So we introduced that a little early. So you're right on point. That's what we've been talking about later. What is going to do with the dollars? Because if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense.
It makes sense.
Well, and it's interesting, and that's part of the reason why we brought you in, and why we wanted you in on this show and this discussion. As said earlier, AD finally put down on wax his thoughts about HBCU realignment, which in itself is a major financial undertaking. Could be a positive. Obviously, any type of realignment that we've seen in the history of college football has all been about money, either making it or saving it. And so it just kind of made sense. And so I'm going to start with you, AD, as we kind of get into this. Give a little background on why you wrote this article, why now, just your thoughts on the background of doing this article at this point.
Why now? COVID-19 led to this article coming out now. You know, a lot of these things that I memorialized on paper were a lot of the conversations that we've had, you know, at the bars, in the house, at the barbecues, in the barbershop, you know, things like that have been, people have said throughout the community, even stuff that we've had off camera while we've been recording our shows over the last couple of years. So just taking all those thoughts, finally having the time to actually put them on paper, number one, and then being able to go through and not only just take the barbershop talk that we had, but to put some facts behind the barbershop talk. Because, you know, you always get great ideas from the street committee at the barbershop. You want to know what's going on in the black community? Holler at the street committee, go to the barbershop or the beauty salon. You get all the gossip. But you also get some ideas. Every now and then you go get a good idea, but a lot of times you go get some bogus theories. So I wanted to put some facts along with some of these ideas and theories that people have been throwing about, and seeing if possible. And yes, I kind of took it to the extreme. I did that on purpose to generate conversation and to generate thoughts, because some of this stuff could happen, and because of COVID-19, some of these things that people have been talking about for 10, 20, 30 years could happen a lot faster than anybody would have thought when this year came in January 1, 2020. I'll yield to Dr. Cavill for a second.
Yeah, I thought it was a extremely fascinating article. The detail that you talked about, I like the fact that it did incubate in the barbershop. Shout out to the barbershops out there. Many of them closed, although we have some individuals in leadership positions are saying open them if you brothers can in any way possible. Sisters as well as in the barbershop. If you can stay at home and keep your family safe, do that. Certainly understand that the financial need may force you to do otherwise, but try to get in there and apply for those loans if possible so you can keep everybody safe. But saying that, I thought the detail that you put in there is fascinating, and I can't wait to get into the dialogue and the discussion to give you some frameworks of a study I did nearly 10 years ago, I guess now, that looked at the reclassification of HBCUs moving from FCS, some Division II, the FBS level. So I'm going to take some of the economic components that I did of that and match them with what you broke down and see where it all comes out.
Hey, Doc, I'm glad you brought that up, not to cut you off, Bryan, because when we thought about doing a live show, I told Bryan and I told our producer, Roy, the first person that we need to invite here is Dr. Cavill, because as I was doing my research, your name came across my Google screen so many times when I started doing research about each of these individual schools, from blog posts that you had done to articles that you had written, and just in general. So I knew if we were gonna have a serious discussion, You needed to be a part of this discussion. So shout out to you, Dr. Cavill, for what you do. And this is our stuff that you started doing yesterday or last week. You've been doing this 20 plus years from research that I've been able to do. That's not counting those conversations you was having in the barbershops and going back to the days of the dorms and all that stuff. So keep up the good work, brother. But that is one reason why I wanted to make sure that we personally reached out to you and made you a part of this conversation.
I appreciate that. Appreciate that in all sincerity. Like they say in the business, the check is in the mail. And I certainly will let you continue to do your job since you paid those accolades. No hate now. I'm hands off. You safe. I'll find another way to get that meal.
I think it's interesting to note, and it's one of the first things you kind of bring up in the article, AD, that the talk of realignment has really come to the surface. Probably it has become such a heavy topic, probably maybe for the first time since maybe I'd go back as far as maybe 20 years, late 90s, early 2000s, when you had new teams coming into the SWAC. You had fluidity in FCS schools wanting to go Division 1A, including Florida A&M. Other FCSs were in that mode. You had teams from out of Division 2 moving up into the FCS level. Over the past 3 years, it's well documented now. You had Hampton University leaving the MEAC in 2018. At the same time, you had Savannah State making the announcement that they were going to leave the MEAC and move from Division 1 FCS down to Division 2. Then most recently, we've had the announcement that North Carolina A&T is leaving the MEAC to go into the Big South. You have Edward Waters making a move or trying to make the move from out of NAIA into Division II SIAC. So you got SUNO, Southern New Orleans, temporarily dropping athletics. So you've got 5 different universities, all different situations, but the idea of realignment has really sort of come up in a hurry, in a way that really it hasn't in probably 20 years. And so,
and Brian, two things that I did leave off of that was 2 schools in Alabama that recently closed, Selma University and Concordia, also within the last 3 to 4 years. So there's also been a shift of some schools and some other schools that are rumored to be in closing or in financial troubles. And I did not bring those out in the article, but that has also led to a little bit of a shift in some of our schools. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, that's all right. So the first school I think that comes up, obviously, and we kind of talked about this a little bit from the article, the school that's sort of, I like to call them the unicorn of this entire realignment shuffle, is Tennessee State. And probably because Tennessee State sits as a school, if you just look at, they sit in the Ohio Valley Conference, which is a school predominantly of schools from out of the Tennessee area, PWIs mostly. They play maybe a 4-game schedule with HBCU schools. Prior to joining the OVC, they were an independent, but I just kind of I just want to ask you guys, why is Tennessee State, and maybe I'll start with you, Doc, why is Tennessee State that, what I like to call that unicorn in this whole mix that it seems like everyone is chasing? Everyone is trying to find a spot to put Tennessee State.
I think the first reason that you see Tennessee State name come up is the fact that they're not in a traditional HBCU conference. And so they're at the highest level that we have HBCU programs. All our HBCU programs operate at the FCS level in terms of the highest level, if you will, at that highest level. And so not excluding FBS, let me be clear that, versus NCAA Division II and NAIA. So with the fact that they're in that space, people want them to be in an HBCU conference. And so they come up. Now, the other things that keeps them up at a high level is the fact that they have a great fan base. They have a great history in terms of Black College National Championship with great coaches such as Merritt. A lot of people dig John Merritt famously in terms of what he did for that program. Obviously, the basketball program with John McClendon and what he was able to do with that program and what they did successfully after that. It's just a significant brand, the number of students in terms of enrollment. So everybody wants that crown jewel. And the main reason is they're not in the HBCU conference. So the rest of them kind of fall under that because they already have ties one way or the other.
AD, what about? I'll ask you. Answer that question as well. What are your thoughts on Tennessee State as that school that it seems like everyone's chasing?
Well, I'm gonna kind of flip it a little bit. Tennessee State 30 years ago kind of set a model. They bucked the trend while everybody else was going and forming conglomerates. Florida A&M and Bethune and Morgan State and Maryland Eastern Shores and everybody were forming the MEAC. You had teams such as Alabama State, UAPB, Mississippi Valley, Alabama A&M coming onto the SWAC. Tennessee State was the lone wolf out there by not joining an HBCU conference at the Division 1A level at that point in time, now the FCS level. And their 30 years of success has kind of given a model for teams such as a Hampton or an A&T to possibly look at. They have their agreement. They play 3 to 4 HBCU football games every year. We remember the Classic in Atlanta. We go to Classic with Jackson State. Throw in 2 other ones. They get the best of both worlds. They get to compete for a national championship on the 1AA level, the FCS level. Although they've never made it beyond the first round, I do believe. Don't quote me on that. I think as far as they ever made it was out of the first round. But they do have that opportunity. They have had success in other sports. They've had success in track and field and cross country, the 2 of the ones that they've had success within the Ohio Valley Conference. So they've shown that they don't have to dominate in football and basketball, our traditional sports, in order to be considered successful in their conference. So they laid a framework. You've got 30 years of history that teams such as Hampton and now A&T are trying to chase and trying to emulate and duplicate. Now,
go ahead.
Okay.
What's your thought?
And this is going to lead probably into part 2 of this. They've set such a trend. I'm one of the reasons for writing this article is I think the dominoes are going to start to fall and possibly try to follow this trend one way or another.
So let me ask this. Doc, let me ask this question, and then maybe this is maybe where you were going, but how did Tennessee State avoid joining the SWAC in the 60s and 70s, or how did the SWAC avoid enticing Tennessee State? Whichever way you want to look at that. Back when Tennessee State and Grambling are the 2 schools. Tennessee State is pumping out pro players at the frequency of Jackson State and Grambling, and how did they never sync up? How did Tennessee State never make it into the SWAC?
I think that's an excellent question that you asked, and as AD has laid the groundwork for us looking at in modern times, one of the things that I did over the years is also look at the historical connection, which is what you're asking. So that is where I was going, and I'm glad, Bryan, that you asked that question. Because from an economic perspective, as I take a step back before I move forward, which alludes to what you were talking about with Tennessee State being that unicorn, some of the things that you want to look at when you start looking at conference churning is what we call it in the academic world, conference realignment, that you see in many publications, is the fact that you need to look at institutional characteristics. And some of those institutional characteristics that you'll see a lot of people do when they do these studies of where a institution should look to go from its athletic program for one component are things like student enrollment, athletic budget, athletic donors, football attendance, and those are things I would call institutional characteristics. Then there are components that we call local market characteristics, which in this category, you start looking at corporate base, population, age of the city that the individual institution is in, household buying income or household effective buying income is probably a better way to state that, or things that you want to look at when you're starting to see these studies of where schools should move. And these are things that you start looking at, the board of regents start looking at, a board governing bodies, the president and chancellor institutions, the commissioner and the AD, finally in terms of what this looks like in terms of when they start making these moves, and finally, obviously, the alumni as well. But historically, one of the reasons that Tennessee State was not making this move, we need to even go back a little further and find out that Grambling, Jackson State, Tennessee State, Central State, Kentucky State, Lincoln, Missouri, to name a few, were all in this conference called the Midwestern Athletic Conference, or the Midwestern Conference, Midwestern Athletic, Midwestern Association, or the variable names that it went through during this time in the early 40s, 50s, and 60s. So it did not start as early as the CIAA, the grandfather of them all, if you would, in 1912, and then the SIC soon after it in 1913, and then the SWAC that we still know to today in 1920. The Midwestern Conference started 10, 15 years after that, if you would, and then only lasted for about 30 years, but it had these juggernauts. So when you look at the history, when you finally got, and it did have Texas Southern before it joined the SWAC. Let me make sure I put them in there for that history. In the early 40s, when they became an institution, and they were the first to leave, if you would, that joined the SWAC as an expansion member then, realignment taking place way back then. And later, you get Grambling State and Jackson, a lot of people would say the crown jewels of that conference, to come into SWAC in that 50s, right? Well, Tennessee State stayed where they were, and they became an independent. But remember, at that time, you were only playing 7, 8 football games. Conferences were a lot smaller. You didn't have 9, 10, 11 members in conferences. So you could have a football schedule of 8, 9, 10 games, play a conference schedule of 6, 7, 8 games at best, and still have a chance to play your regional peers. So it was no problem in regards to Tennessee State to having this type of schedule, independency, if you would. FAMU looked at it. They were similar in the SIC. They basically played an independent schedule because although they were in the SIC for all other sports and football, they essentially only had to play like 2 or 3 conference games, and the rest of them were independent, which is a little nugget in the history that many people don't realize as they were a member of the SIC. But when you start having this change in the guard, when you start having these teams move from their own conference alignment into the NIA in the 50s and later in the 60s in the NCAA quickly moved and separated, where they started having small schools, large school divisions, which ultimately came Division II for small, and then large ended up developing a Division I, which was further separated in 1AA and 1A, which is now FCS and FBS, if you would. So when the schools started integrating and deciding that they wanted to play the larger institutions, as we see in the 60s and 70s, what you find out is that they needed to form these conferences, and they moved up. And as they moved up, they went into FCS. So you see the SWAC doing it as a whole conference. You see the SIC joining the Division II, and then all of a sudden the emergence of the MEAC in the 70s as it is created, brings in FAMU, right? In 1982, SWAC gets Alabama State. Alabama A&M is still in the SIAC as a Division II. So regionally, while they're playing Jackson State and these teams, there's no proximity in terms of regionality in the conference. The last part of it is extremely important. It was really basketball that drove Tennessee State deciding to join a conference. And in this case, OVC, a regional friendly conference that they decided to join, right? which we would refer to as a historically white conference, because all the members were historically white colleges and universities, as I like to refer to them, versus HBCUs, they wanted the automatic bid to the basketball tournament, which was lucrative. It's even more lucrative now, but it was lucrative then. You didn't see a lot of independent teams getting at-large bids to the basketball tournament. So you really needed that automatic bid. OVC was open to them joining. And then this was also during a time when there was a desegregation, a lot of people like to call it integration guideline that was done at the federal level around the same time with the school, the University of Tennessee system, the school there in Nashville, and Tennessee State in regards to that. And the federal mandate said that they needed to desegregate these schools, which was going around the country, right? Well, Tennessee State had did a much better job of integrating, desegregating its institution from a faculty level, if you would, and a student population level, while Tennessee didn't do a very good job at that. And so ultimately, they merged the schools, and Tennessee had to merge in Tennessee State because it was doing the better job of desegregation. And that also was a reason and a rationale for Tennessee State to join the OVC. Again, the bigger reason was really for the basketball tournament, but they joined as a football member. And again, the OVC was a smaller number of institutions, so they could still play more of the HBCU programs. While they only play 3 now, at that time they could play 4 or 5 of them. So historically, it's important to understand that context, that the SWAC was not in Alabama at this time in the 70s. Remember, they didn't get Alabama State until 82. So it was a little further compact than what you see it today. So that's why today it makes more sense to see this move take place than it did historically at the time.
That's a great point that you brought up about why Tennessee State joined the OVC, because I think one of the things that always gets talked about as it relates to Tennessee State, and even today, and this is, AD, when we put up the odds and the likelihood of Tennessee State joining the SWAC, you put it at 20%, which is probably the lowest percent you gave anything in this article. I gotta tell you. But is the mandate to, or I don't even know if mandate, we kind of traded some text back and forth, so I don't know, is the I don't know what the right word is, the pressure or the incentive for Tennessee State staying in the OVC still in place in 2020 like it was in 1987? And
putting this article out, got a lot of comments back and forth on many different pages that this article was shared on. We originally shared it on our page, and by the time this thing took traction, it had been shared on 6, 7, 8 different HBCU pages. One comment, and I'm going to go with some of the interesting comments that I received regarding that. One was that the OVC is based in the state of Tennessee. So them getting Tennessee State to stay in that conference, knowing what Tennessee State brings, the value that a Tennessee State brings as far as name recognition, with the classics that they do, and the crowds and everything else, and of course the band and everything else revolving around Tennessee State, there may be some kind of undercover pressure to make sure that Tennessee State remains happy and stays in that conference to help the conference, i.e. the local economy of the state of Tennessee. Just one interesting theory that I saw that came back.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And what I'll cut to the chase. There's political underline that is aligned with all this from a legislative perspective, which means that Tennessee State, while there is no mandate, no legal legislation that is out there that I want to make clear of, because that's an old fable that has kind of twisted around in the wind, that they're locked in this from a legal perspective. That is not true. And we need to get that out front face, because we deal in the facts and we do that here. there could certainly be some political pressure tied to the financial support of these institutions. And obviously, this is not supposed to take place, and you would never get anybody to say that out loud. That
the handshake agreements.
Right, but those are things that go back door. So those are things that need to be talked about and considered. Now, I think the way the things are done now, that that I would give it a much greater chance, not because it may happen, but because I don't think that pressure is as palatable as it was back in the 70s when the federal courts came in and did this on a institutional level. This was not an athletic level. I want to make that clear when they made that legal framing of the merger of these two institutions. But the big question today is going to be financial. Can the SWAC, if they were going to get them, or the MEAC, or any other conference for that matter, even at the FBS level, if Tennessee State was going to move up, I mean, all these things need to be played when we talk about conference turning, realignment, and expansion, is the Sun Belt. What about their interest of pulling Tennessee State to move up to the FBS? Does current president, new AD that came in, the board up there, do they have goals and alignments that would take Tennessee State to the FBS in any of these ACCs we talk about, if you would, which means you're talking about leaving the OVC anyway and going to the Sun Belt Conference or a HBCU conference that all operates at the FBS. All these things are on the table because people are looking at financial decisions. There's a cultural component to it. There's a difficult component to it. At some point, obviously, we'll start getting into that FAMU discussion in terms of another institution we put up there and them looking at moving from the SWAC. One thing that I could add to that is that I know for a fact that the commissioner, Dr. Charles McCullin, would not go out there hunting for Florida A&M. Florida A&M would essentially have to come to the SWAC because he has a great relationship with Dr. Dennis Thomas, and he does not want to roll that. So those politics that you're talking about, whether it's from legislative level or board level, or whether it's from presidential level or AD level or alumni level, are extremely important when we start talking about realignment. Those are things that are not just in the wind. Those are factual things that take place. At the end of the day, I think the financial component will take the biggest brunt of this, and ultimately the decisions will be made on that level of what financial benefits are made to an institution to make those decisions. But all those other things on the peripheral and there will take place. So it is important that we put that on the table contextually, that these commissioners and these ADs have relationships, and they don't want to harm those relationships. So this is not something that's going to be done cavalier, as we will do it in the barbershops, if you would talk about it, because it's just fun for us. We like the idea of what would take place if you get Southern and FAMU to line up in a conference matchup. What?
Let's stay within the discussion of the SWAC, because obviously, I think personally, and maybe you guys will agree, and I think it's a general, well accepted thought that in terms of conferences that are probably doing a great job, or maybe the best at controlling its brand and really selling its brand and making a strong statement that we are not going to bend to anything that is not good for us, is the SWAC. And you can go to any case where you can talk about the fact that they didn't move the Bayou Classic in order to appease the requirements to get into the Division I AA playoffs. You could go to the creation of the SWAC championship game, which at the time, I don't think every conference didn't have a SWAC championship game in their football conference when that was created in '99. You jump in and correct me if I'm wrong there, Doc. So, I mean, that was...
Absolutely. You're right on it.
That was sort of a strong step for them. You can go to attendance numbers. I mean, consistently for, I think, 17 years, it's somewhere in the teens, the SWAC has been the leader in attendance numbers in the FCS/Division I AA level. So the brand is strong. the fan base is there, and so when we talk about expansion, it's almost like the SWAC is like, yeah, like you just said, we're not going to chase anybody. Anybody who wants to come to us, or anybody who wants to be a part of the SWAC, will listen, but we're not out chasing anybody. So that's moving forward to FAMU, Florida A&M, who is constantly being rumored to, especially over the last decade maybe, to be thought of, hey, where is FAMU? Where is FAMU's place in Black college football? I mean, it is this brand, this unique brand that covers the country, that can go up and down the Northeast and draw people. It can go through the South and draw people. We've even seen it go out West and draw people. But I found it interesting that in 1979, Florida A&M had a choice. They had a choice of joining the MEAC or joining the SWAC, and they chose the MEAC. And I'm like, I always think, and when that was, I think Doc, you presented that, you showed us that article. I was like, wow, can you imagine what this landscape might look like had Florida A&M chosen to go to the SWAC, because they chose to go to the MEAC, and right after them, Bethune-Cookman goes. And so, AD, your article, you give the likelihood of Florida A&M moving to about an 80% chance of moving from the MEAC to the SWAC. I give you an opportunity now. Why?
Well, I'm going to throw a caveat out there. With A&T leaving next year, Hampton's already gone. Two dominoes have already failed when it comes to the MEAC. A third domino will fall within the next 2 to 3 years, in my opinion. Those three dominoes are Howard, North Carolina Central, and Florida A&M University. From everything that's out there, I think the one that's going to move first is going to be Florida A&M University. I think the one that moves second will be Howard. Central will fall in line behind those two. So I think Central, those are the three largest schools within the MEAC conference at this point in time. Probably the three most powerful schools. Howard from an academic point, FAMU from a historical point, from the band and just the program and the draw that it has on a national level. Central has come from, in the last 10 years, it's come from like out of nowhere as far as their program and their enrollment. They were Division II team in the early 2000s. Now they're one of the prominent FCS teams that we have in this country as programs, approaching 9,000 students. So those three schools are going to be the ones that move next. And based upon which one that moves first is going to determine the fate of the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. Just my gut feeling, based upon 30 plus years of history since 1979, like the doc said, you had them try to leave in 84. They left and coming back in 84. They left and came back in the early 2000s. There was a report in 2014 that says the SWAC would be the best conference for them. With everything going on, with the COVID, with the travel costs to the D.
So one of the things that AD was talking about there, which I think was perfect when you talk about it, is their history. While we give a lot of love in terms of Tennessee State being a unicorn, probably the most aggressive institution, if you would, in regards to trying to do what's right for their program is Florida A&M. As AD just did a great job of the history of what takes place there, FAMU is that institution, and in a lot of ways, it's an outlier, along with Bethune-Cookman, to the rest of the MEAC. It wasn't until recently, when you had Savannah State came in, that you became a contiguous conference alignment with the MEAC in terms of the state of Florida and the Florida schools. Unfortunately, or fortunately, how you look at it in terms of what case, obviously Savannah State, it did what is best for them. They come back in and they recently leave. So now it opens up that space in between there, what takes place. And then you add up what takes place essentially 2 years ago with Hampton losing. Then the announcement this year with North Carolina A&T. And this is a North Carolina A&T athletic program, particularly in the sport of football, that has had a resurgence. And so it's become this significant brand in HBCU sports in terms of what it's able to do across the landscape. And just as an overall academic institution that is growing leaps and bounds, that has now become the largest enrollment of students of any HBCU across the country, well above several of them, if you would. So it becomes this significant pillar. But historically, that's been FAMU as one of the largest institutions, along with Southern. In terms of these top three institutions, let me add Howard in there as the fourth one in terms of major enrollments that are peaking at a level that keeps them as outliers in enrollment. They've been doing great jobs of branding their institutions, of great education, and then they're able to do really well in sports outside of maybe Howard to some degree. And even it had its peak if you go back to the late 80s and early 90s in terms of what that brand did in the sport of football, which covers and carries a lot of it. Well, you bring back FAMU historically being aggressive of always looking at, and the fact that it's always kind of been this outlier, right? And then you start seeing the expansion of the SWAC. It moves into Alabama. Now it becomes more regional friendly with the two schools in Alabama along with the SWAC. So it becomes to start making more sense with this. And then obviously you have the concern with a lot of people in terms of the overall direction of the MEAC. There's always been a concern with FAMU in terms of cost of travel. But unfortunately, last 10 years, the cost that it has athletic program and the board at FAMU that has certainly continued to push the fact that FAMU needs to stay within a certain budget athletically. Now, they created that. I want to put that out there. So in some degrees, in my opinion, it's kind of artificial, but it is the board governing structure of Florida A&M that's saying you're going to stay within this budget, which makes it challenging when you start to see the cost of travel increasing. The COVID-19 pandemic is going to exacerbate that in terms of the cost, especially when you have the inability, if you would, of those programs doing that. So when you start talking about that component of it, I think it becomes important to start looking at all these variables that are taking place to get this going on. So FAMU does a study. The study comes back, as you said, AD, and says, hey, regionally, the fan bases, a lot of cultural components are there in the SWAC. That's where you should look. But they've been hanging on and trying to support the MEAC and giving the MEAC every chance it has to be successful. But I think some of these last dominoes and variables with COVID-19 pandemic, North Carolina A&T moving shortly before that, obviously Hampton, as well as Savannah State moving out of the MEAC obviously was down. And even before that, if we want to trace it back to somewhere, with Winston-Salem State with their short stint in terms of coming up in the MEAC, which would have gave perfect geographical proximity and allowed the conference to get to 14 teams in basketball, 12 in football, meaning they could have split the conference. Would they have had the idea of creating their own conference championship game? But with those things starting to fail, it becomes more incentive for FAMU to start looking at, should they be a member of the SWAC or a different conference for that matter. And then you introduce the fact that they got a new DP of intercollegiate athletics who's always going to do their due diligence of what is best for that program and athletics and overall institutional growth for Florida A&M. All these variables start to come play and starts to lead you in a direction that you at least have to do your due diligence and look. And does that mean, as AD said, an 80% chance of them joining the SWAC? And we may find out in the short pitch.
And something else, just to throw it out there, you know, I kept this discussion to the HBCU conferences as much as possible. But if you're looking for a pure dollars and cents geographical, the SoCon is the perfect geographical fit for Florida A&M University, with every team in the SoCon being that's the Southern Conference, being in either Alabama or Georgia, with Chattanooga being in Tennessee, but that's really Tennessee. Chattanooga, Tennessee is really North Georgia. So, if you really wanted to limit your travel, that is the best conference for FAMU as far as travel is concerned. But we're here to promote HBCU sports, so I just had to throw that out there. Now, I've thrown it out there. We're not going to chase them.
So, AD, I know you got cut off earlier. Did you get to your point there that you were finishing up there earlier?
I don't know where you guys cut me off at, but I
told you I had you.
But Doc,
you keep slipping, I'm gonna get you.
But Doc actually came back, and if you didn't hear me, made some of the same points that I made during my conversation. So
no, actually, you were. I was picking up from what you did. I think you did a great lead in and actually handed me the ball to do a football pun perfectly in the gut. So I just kept running with it. So I took off with what you laid out there, and the historical context that you brought to the floor on FAMU was perfectly. And all I did was literally took the handoff and took the next step of saying why it becomes more relevant now, and that's what you heard coming back in. But you gave me in the basketball thing, a perfect alley-oop, and I just slammed it home.
Oh, well, I'm glad I could drop a Drew's dive on you.
So, Drew, you put the number at 80% in terms of the likelihood of happening, FAMU moving to the SWAC. If that happens, does the SWAC need to consider adding 2 teams? Meaning it's a lot of people seem to think that if Florida A&M comes, bringing Bethune-Cookman with them makes sense to some degree. The Bethune-Cookman did follow Florida A&M to the MEAC. Does the SWAC need to add 2 teams, Doc? If FAMU comes, do they need to bring that second team? What would it look like if it's just one team?
It becomes a little more challenging if it's one team, just because of the schedule alignment, especially with the conference wanting to continue to do the championship game. The perfect alignment would be 2 teams, at least 12. And there's a couple of reasons behind that. First, football, which obviously is the big umbrella out there that most people look at, and that's where you want 2 divisions of 6 teams. Each division plays a division. You can rotate 2 or 3 teams out of the other division, maybe have one that is grandfather that's always on the division for a rival. So the perfect match is 12 in football. In basketball, oddly enough, it probably becomes more important because there's legislation in basketball that you can't split a division in NCAA basketball at the Division I level unless you have 12 teams, and which will help you with the travel component, which I'm sure financially is going to be something that is important for Florida A&M if they start analyzing and seeking to make this decision. So in that rationale, makes more sense to have 12 teams or even 14 teams for that matter, as you see something like the SEC most recently in terms of the Big Ten component of it. But you could do it with just 11 teams. But mostly you'd want to get to 12 team. And again, that's another reason why Tennessee State will start to become heavy in this discussion. Can FAMU, in my opinion, convince, if you would, bring Tennessee State along with them? Because again, I don't see Charles being aggressive on this. Now, once they make the deal and somehow it comes to together in FAMU, maybe then later the SWAC comes in, checks out Tennessee State and tries to bring him in. But if they try to bring him in as a partnership all at the same time, I think the onus is going to be on FAMU, if you would. So that's the thing that you want to look at when you talk about what's taking place in this alignment. And when I say Charles, I'm talking about Dr. Charles McCullen, the commissioner of the Southwestern Athletic Conference, because I do not see him being the aggressor in regards to because of his relationship with Dr. Dennis Thomas. So those are some key components that we want to look at this in this factor.
Doc, I think we've got your co-host, Mike. Is that Mike Washington on the line with us?
Yes. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
All right, pleasure.
Say, Mike, you gonna have to get your time straightened out when you coming on the show.
Man,
like
you brother, you just said 1 o'clock. I talk with people globally, East Coast. Hey, you're gonna have to get your time zones correct.
See,
Go ahead, Brian. Sorry about this.
We did say 1 o'clock Eastern, so yeah, Doc, you got it. Doc, you can get on Doc. You didn't pass that info along to you, there, Mike.
I do this guy like that all the time. I will turn off his mic. So if you get too out of control, Brian, Roy back in the studio, make sure you know you got the right to hit that pause button. So Mike, do your boy a favor. Let's get this right now.
Joining us right now, Mike Washington, the co-host of Inside the HBCU Sports Lab with Dr. Kenyatta Cavill. We've been talking about the landscape or AD's article on conference realignment. So, Mike, I'll kind of catch you up on where we're at in the discussion. We were into the discussion about the SWAC and Florida A&M and the prospect of Florida A&M joining the SWAC. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that domino potentially falling for Florida A&M and then for the SWAC?
I think for me, at the outset, when I first heard this and started hearing the chatter, you're thinking, okay, now you have an HBCU mega conference. But then other questions start to loom. And I heard some of that discussion as I was joining the conversation. Number one, what does this do for travel costs? Does this mean FAMU, and I don't know if you talked about it, brings in a Bethune? What does this mean for Tennessee State? Potentially. The other thing is, what does this mean for the other sports? Not only basketball, how would you realign that conference, but what about the spring sports? Would the spring sports stay in a different conference? I think all of those questions also have to be asked. But I would say on the onset, now you have that mega HBCU conference. I think it bodes well. The other concern is, what does it do for the Celebration Bowl? Monetarily wise, exposure wise, and does this truly mean the detriment and the end of the MEAC? My early analysis and answer is yes.
Well, Mike, if you actually read the last paragraph in my article, I kind of summed it up like, with all my great ideas, I just realized that I killed the Celebration Bowl. So that's how I summed up the article after taking all that time to write it. It's like, I just killed the MEAC Challenge and the Celebration Bowl, which are two of the bigger money bases.
You just snapped your finger and it was all gone. The MEAC Challenge gone. Celebration Bowl gone. Just like that. Good job, AD.
But my bad. But it makes sense.
That's $2 million going away with it. Oh man, AD, man.
And now I'm gonna bring this up, and I'm looking at some of the comments online. This one came from Daryl Brewer. Well, first, Mo Carter reminded all of us that FAM and Southern used to play each other for about 15 years consecutive. FAM tried to go up to the FBS level, but Daryl Brewer brings up something about the image and likeness of athletes that that's being legislated and hopefully will be passed soon. This is something that I did not consider when writing this article, because it was just now coming down the pipeline, but this may actually change the dynamics of our HBCUs. Also, the fact that now our athletes are able to make money off the likeness to go along with possible conference realignment and some of the other economic factors coming out of this COVID-19 situation.
Let me jump in, guys, because one of the other, as we talk about the SWAC, and obviously we talk about potentially Florida A&M joining and things of that nature. If you wanted to, say that, hey, you want to see an even number, or you want to see two teams come in, I think that was the next thing in your article, AD, that you brought up. Who might that second team be? And there are some sort of dominoes based on your proposal here as it relates to Bethune-Cookman. Why or why not Bethune-Cookman? South Carolina State, which that floored me. I hadn't even considered the possibility of a South Carolina State. And then the one that really you got me with was North Carolina Central. So I'll give you a chance, AD, talk a little bit about that third team, or second team, that might join Florida A&M if, say, the SWAC were to expand?
First of all, I'm gonna take it back. I think, and I'm hoping that if FAMU comes, that will be the nugget that Tennessee State needs to go ahead and finally make that move. But in lieu of them making that move, we're correct. A second team needs to come. Obviously, everybody always throws out FAMU and Bethune when they talk about those two always making that move together. Problem is, Bethune was facing an $8 million deficit that pre-COVID-19 they were trying to get handled. I don't think financially that Bethune can afford to make that move to the SWAC. And honestly, Bethune may come out of this COVID-19 looking to move down because of their financial situation versus stay at the FCS level. That takes care of Bethune-Cookman. South Carolina State, within the last few years, has faced similar financial issues, having to cut back on certain things. So we've got the two most logical schools geographically that should come have their set of financial issues. The most stable school is Central right now. Now, it would be a stretch for Central to get into the SWAC, but if FAMU comes and Tennessee State does not come, I see no reason why they're on friendly discussions with Central and Central being able to possibly come and be that important 12 team that Dr. Kabir was talking about.
Doc, go to you, and then Mike follow up after Doc.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but you're actually right. Those are the ways that how all this starts to really get convoluted. But everything that you align out are things that can take place in regards to just how mobile this variable is if you take place. So obviously Bethune-Cookman, in terms of one of the reasons that the financial issue is there, is talking about reaccreditation, which is extremely important to any institution of higher education.
Last thing we need is another Boys Brown.
Exactly. In that framework. So one of the components that was associated with their reaccreditation was the fact that they needed to have a large sum of money. It's my understanding that they're really close. But even if that takes place, if there is not this synergy between the two and a partnership that often takes place between Bethune-Cookman and FAMU, obviously that four-letter classic out there is extremely huge. All the history with these two institutions are huge. But tough decisions are also made in these financial crunches. So if FAMU says, hey, we're going to do what's best for us, we'll still play you all if you stay at the FCS level, which means we can still maintain the Florida Classic, but we think for us, it's best for us to go to the SWAC or go to another conference. So the question becomes, do they go along? Do they push to bring in Tennessee State? Do they make this contingent of them coming with Bethune-Cookman? If Bethune-Cookman sees that option and the door open, do they roll over with FAMU to go into, i.e. in this case, we're talking about the SWAC or any other conference? Or does Bethune-Cookman say, no, travel-wise, it's just too much for us? Does SWAC say, no, FAMU, we want to keep this all a public institution variable, so we're only looking for you to come. We'll take Tennessee State. If you can convince them to come with you, we'll do it like that. And so that variable of Bethune-Cookman really starts to grow. And then if they don't have the benefits of being able to come along with FAMU, then you're right. Then the second case is, do we look even more so at the SIC? Does that really boil along with us financially where we want to be in this place now? Does the NCAA allow us to cut sports with the COVID-19 that helps us maybe maintain our Division I status? If that is not the case, then, those answers you need starts to shorten down. If South Carolina starts to see all these variables take place, they can't increase their enrollment. Do they finally say, hey, it's more better for us to join the SIC or the CIAA as you talked about looking at? So those variables start to take place. Or does the MEAC under the leadership of Dr. Tennis Thomas says, no, we're going to work with you. We're going to find a way to make this work to keep both Bethune-Cookman and South Carolina State. So all these variables are going to start to play out. Does the commissioner of the SIAC get involved in saying, hey, these are the great things we're doing at the Division II level. This is a great world down here. We can make it successful. We think you'll be a great fit. Does he come on board and start trying to sell them the benefits of operating a Division II? The nice thing that both South Carolina State and Bethune-Cookman have, that they're regionally in an area, with South Carolina State really being able to have its choice from both the CIAA and SIAC. Obviously, with Bethune-Cookman, more or less just the SIAC, but they have two historically rich HBCU conferences within a region that operate at the Division II level. So they do have those choices on the table, which would be different if you're looking at a Langston out here in the Southwest region that doesn't necessarily have that clean option when it comes to trying to keep the culture of joining the HBCU conference because of the distance that takes place. So those are the things that kind of align with what I thought AD was bringing to the table and asking people to think about.
Mike, your thoughts?
To reiterate on a lot of the points that have been stated, I guess I look at it also from the revenue and from the fan perspective. If you're able to bring a Bethune, which we've all kind of much agreed, put the cards on the table. There are certification issues with Bethune. The other thing is financial issues. Does it make sense to bring them into the SWAC? I think a couple of you have alluded to that. If you're able to convince a Tennessee State to come in, now if the commissioner is committed to rivalries and the HBCU Classic, now you're bringing the FAMU Southern back in the mix. You're potentially bringing the FAMU Tennessee State back into the mix. I'm one who believes that also if you weaken one HBCU conference, should we also seek to strengthen the other two, that being the SWAC and the SIAC. Having that thought, it would seem to make more sense for South Carolina State to maybe consider the SIAC as a possible option just based on their student base, based on their financial situation, looking at travel. If you look at all of those variables, it seems to me that those pieces align more favorably in those directions. The other piece of that, and I think I don't want us to overlook is, yes, we're talking about football, but where do the other sports come into play? When do we start discussing that when we're talking about realignment? Is it possible that we may have to cut some of those sports? Because if we don't, that could detrimentally affect whether we can bring a Bethune. That's a deal breaker from my perspective. Tennessee State would be in a better option if they were interested, if they could be convinced to join FAMU in that move. So I think that's a deal breaker that we can't overlook. I understand that football is the revenue generating sport, especially in the FBS level. However, we cannot turn our heads to the other sports. And I'm not just talking about basketball. I'm talking about baseball, those other sports. What are those options? Because to me, when we're making this realignment decision, part of that decision is what's going to become of those other sports. So
that's, what, Mike, that's a great point that you bring up, because I do think a lot of this is based on football. And I think we're being honest here if we're talking about it, because football is such a revenue generator for most schools. And you brought up some good points. I guess I would ask everyone here, Dot, Drew, even Mike, to what degree should a school or a conference consider the other sports? I mean, some people will, I know personally, will say, well, football dictates, so that's what should carry. It sounds like, Mike, you're more along the lines of showing more thought and concern for the other sports. But I'll start with you, Mike. What percentage would you weigh if you were advising a school? How would you weigh the percentage of weighing football's impact versus other sport impacts?
Well, I think you have to look at it from the perspective that right now we are considering student athletes. They are athletes. I think you'd have to look at other models that have demonstrated that kind of success, or look at where others have trailblazed. If you look at the SEC, it's quite obvious that it's going to be more generated by football, which is a revenue-generated sport, and it's also driven by the demand, the market demand, regionally speaking, in the Southeast. If you look out at maybe the Pac-12, there's a more across-the-board consideration of all sports when they're looking at alignment. And I would say that from our perspective, our being the HBCU, I think you also have to look at attendance. You also have to look at your budget. And then I think that has to drive the decision. What do I mean by that? If you have a budget that you can barely sustain only, let's say, 2/3 of your sports from fall to spring, at present, where conditions are right now, then you have to look at those other sports where you show no involvement, no, at least presently or in the future. And a lot of times that will drive your decision as well for you, versus us going in and saying, okay, we're not going to have track and field. Okay, we're not going to have baseball. A lot of that can be driven by your student population, your student base, the interest, where your grades are, APR rankings even. So versus me, as opposed to me coming in and saying, it should be 60-30 here, 20-30. I think that's the wrong way to approach it. I think you have to look at all of the variables across the board and then look at the numbers. Doc will tell you that I'm a numbers guy, and let that drive your decision. If you can't take all sports across the board, then you have to look at external factors. Where does the NCAA stand with this? What's their ruling going to be? After COVID-19, are they going to make a across-the-board decision and say, hey, SWAC, hey, MEAC, hey, SDCA, these are the sports you got to look at cutting? That may also help drive the decision versus us sitting in a vacuum and saying, hey, this is what the ratio should be.
Great point. AD, what are your thoughts on that? I know it's kind of a little off script from what we talked about, but what are your thoughts?
It would be tough for you to get a athletic director to admit this, but when you talk about costs, there are many of HBCU athletic directors who, when they looked at their bottom line, their budgets really were not bad that they canceled spring sports because it gave them an opportunity to finish in the black after all your money from football and basketball, because nobody makes money in baseball, softball, correct, track, and tennis, because those are your spring sports. You got one or two that play golf, but nobody makes money. So you have nothing but cash going out, nothing coming in. You won't get anybody to come on air and admit it, but if you talk to them behind the scenes, they will tell you, I'm happy that we didn't have spring sports from a budget point of view, not from a student athlete point of view. Everybody's upset with the student athletes and the opportunities, but from a pure dollars and cents point of view, COVID-19 did a lot of HBCU budgets a favor. I'll leave it right there a year to Doc.
Y'all getting in some great conversation here, because this is what I really like when we start looking at the economics of this and the business side of this. And that's why when I'm not mad at Mike, I make sure that the mute button isn't pushed, because he gives us those numbers. So thank you for Mike for showing up and showing out. Well, with that said, kind of picking back on both Mike and AD, as you talk about that, you're exactly right. It really depends on the program. And while there were several programs, ADs may be very quiet at talking about, hey, we didn't lose all these additional expenses because they were able to not have to worry about the travel costs associated. I would throw one program in there that I'd be remiss that I didn't say this, is Southern. Southern's, in terms of their baseball, they're able to generate some significant money, and they may be the only one making money in baseball, if not at least cutting even. But you're right, your general principles across the board, most of these, what we call Olympic sports, a lot of people call them non-revenue sports, do not generate money. Texas Southern is unique with the TSU relays that actually is a revenue generating that allows TSU track men's and women's program to operate essentially in the black because of how much money they bring into that. But again, overall, most of these programs do not do that. While SWAC has increased its ability to generate some revenue from baseball, which would be interesting for FAMU because while the baseball in the MEAC has been competitive because of its regionality, I'm not sure if the fan support has been as ravenous as it is. And with the type of support that you have in FAMU generally for football, you could see that there's no pride that is not going to allow FAMU to be outdone by schools like Jackson State and FAMU in basketball or baseball. So if you start to see around the area, if they happen to be in the SWAC, that they see these fan base and their fervency for baseball with a program that has a great deal of history in baseball, that's resurged itself in a lot of ways, I can start quickly seeing that the fan interest in baseball will take up as well. And now it can become a revenue generator. So to both your points, that is some of the factors that take place. Where can you find new revenue streams? How can you create new revenue streams from such as making this decision in terms of realignment? So these are the factors that take place when you're trying to make the argument to your president or to your board if they're not telling you as the AD that you need to be looking at these decisions. So that goes both ways in terms of what's taking place, and that's what makes this so intriguing and interesting when you start taking the movement. Obviously, as Bryan alluded very early, one of the most stable conferences out there across the country, specifically in HBCUs, which could be good and bad depending on how you look at it, is the SWAC. The rest of the conferences out there have churned. SIAC in terms of bringing institutions in. CIAA in terms of bringing institutions in. Now, over the 15 years, they've lost some institutions to the MEAC over those times, but those are conferences that have changed just as much as the MEAC. So really the only conference that's been stable, I've been arguing that in some ways the SWAC has probably been too stable. It needs an influx, and now it needs to do it in what I call the positive way in terms of expansion, bringing teams in. The last time they did that was with Alabama A&M and Pine Bluff, but that's almost been 20 years. So you think about the stability there, that's a good thing, but that influx of new talent is there, and this all comes down to can a commissioner, can an AD make the revenue proposition to his president, or is the president, along with those three components, making that argument to their board, because that's ultimately where this decision will be made at the board level, and they'll ask the questions. Now, they might do that behind closed doors, and so when it comes out, they're going to be in. If they can answer those questions, and they check up, and they're going to act like no big deal. You want to do this? They'll check the boxes. But you better believe behind closed doors, they asking these tough questions that both AD and Mike brought up on the financial side.
You gonna jump in, AD?
Yeah, our buddy Bo Carter from up in Huntsville, Alabama, has thrown out an idea of Albany State possibly joining the SWAC. From a pure numbers point of view, as far as enrollment, Albany State fits in the model. I'm not quite sure that with some of the other stuff going on, especially with HBCUs in the state of Georgia, that logistically that could work out with Albany State. So I threw the comment out there. Anybody else want to take it and run with it?
Yeah, I'll jump in there on Albany State. Mike has been in Georgia for a while, so I'm sure he might want to comment too. Quickly, what I would say is that with the merger there that has increased their enrollment, budget-wise, they would have the budget because of the enrollment numbers to be able to make that move. They have a fervent fan base now. A lot of people outside of the SIC might not be aware of it, and so there could be some branding awareness that they would need to do. So it was probably more advantageous for the SWAC than it is for Albany State. But that's another one interesting seeing. Is this the institution now that it wants to grow its brand and wants to attach itself to the SWAC in such a way? It would keep along with the current model of the 10-member SWAC being a public institution and obviously HBCU. So I could see some regionality with bringing in the footprint of Georgia and Florida in terms of the expansion. So I can see it working out in that facet.
Yeah, if you'll allow me to, I've lived in that region. My father-in-law teaches at Fort Valley State. I'm very familiar with that part of the country, as Dr. Bill alluded to. I do agree on the one hand that Albany State has the budget, without question. My concern lies within the fact that their presence is deeply, and I mean deeply rooted in that part of the country. So I think Doc hit the nail on the head when he said they would have to overcome the branding issue. To further that, I think the question would be asked, does their budget allow them to really incorporate the travel schedule if they match well with the SWAC model? There's going to be a number of games over the test of time that they're going to have to incorporate a significant increase in their travel budget. And can their fan base continue to support? Can their budget continue to support? I do agree that it is a stronger move for the SWAC in terms of bringing another school and expanding the SWAC footprint and exposure. I'm not as much convinced on what it means for the Albany State piece. Do you also, you're talking about a strong classic, that Albany State Fort Valley game brings a lot of exposure, and you bring, and I talk about tailgating, I'm telling you, Brunswick stew and everything down there. So do you walk away from that? That's the fan of me speaking. Sorry, I digressed a little bit. But do you walk away from those types of matchups, from that region of the country? So that would concern me with that move.
I don't think that you lose those classic matchups. You don't lose a Bethune FAM. You don't lose an Albany State Fort Valley State. I mean, except for the fact that Tuskegee and Alabama State started fighting about money, you would have never lost that. You would have never lost that. So you can maintain those relationships, Division I to Division II. But you talk about Albany State. Albany State, I mean, you think you just created a rival with FAMU, who they were already getting ready to play in Miami. They're supposed to be playing in Miami this year. But Albany State, FAMU, they're less than 2 hours away. They're an hour and a half away. That becomes a rival. Now you've got a rival. I guess we could call it the real ASU rival between Albany State and Alabama State. Just like you got the real HU rival. Alabama A&M. So Albany State would have some good rivals, potentially geographically within the SWAC, while being able to maintain the rivalry with the Savannah State and with the Fort Valley State. So if they could pull that off, now the one thing Albany State would have to do is they would have to drastically upgrade their football stadium. But outside of the football stadium, all the other facilities, especially when they absorbed Darton College, between the East and the West campus, they have everything else that they need, minus the upgraded football stadium.
Yeah, I do agree with that, and that you got to. And I guess when I speak to that, there's the SWAC East and the SWAC West, and depending on how this thing is parsed out, if it is to come to fruition, at some point they're going to have to travel all the way to Houston, Texas, and play a Texas Southern, maybe, or maybe a Houston over the. They already traveled to Central State, to Wilberforce, Ohio, and to Frankfort, Kentucky. So what's the difference? Yes, agreed. Is that one game a year? Now you're talking 2 or 3 times. I don't disagree with it, but again, if you bring them, there are certain upgrades to their athletic program they're going to have to make. I think their budget can sustain it, but to me, the other piece is their branding outside of it. I think it's a good move, more so for the SWAC than it is for Albany State. Does their basketball team come along as well? Then you have to throw their travel costs in as well. I don't think it's as easy a move as we say, but I think their budget can sustain it potentially.
Let's transition over to the MEAC. And I think obviously the MEAC is coming up on its 50th year, and it's kind of interesting that the MEAC is coming up on its 50th year. The SWAC is at its 100th year, but there's the fluidity of the membership in the MEAC has sort of fluctuated. It seems like maybe every 10 years, every 10, 15 years, there's been some movement. And I think we've plucked teams from the MEAC. Obviously, we've seen Hampton leave the MEAC. We've seen Savannah State. We've seen now A&T. So I think a lot of negative has been heaped onto the MEAC. So I'm going to spin this next question a little more towards the positive end and ask you guys, how does the MEAC how does the conference maintain or improve its place as a Division I conference. If that is something that is to happen, how does it maintain its place as a Division I conference? I see the smirk on AD's face.
Wow.
I'll come to you last, AD.
Wow.
I'll go to Dr. Seville. Doc, what are your thoughts?
You just asked a lot with that question.
I did. I tried to spin it on a positive note here.
Yeah, Brian, that's why you the host and doing a great job. You spun that real good. But on a serious note, there are a couple of caveats that the MEAC still has that I think are important, and that is the fact that they are a conference that still has a minimum of at least 6 teams if they stay above that. And so even with FAMU losing and the world falls apart with Bethune-Cookman and South Carolina State losing, you still have that, 6 teams there, which means they still have the Division I automatic bid to the NCAA, which means they essentially have that $1.5 million that a lot of institutions would consider something that they would like to be a part of, which means their intake at 6-7 schools gets larger because they're not splitting it as much, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is that you do have some regional schools in there that have that enrollment number where at least those institutions could consider Bowie State, Virginia State, that have been athletic powerhouses. Now, there's a question in terms of the commitment that those institutions have made, even at the Division II level, in terms of full scholarships in a lot of ways. But those are schools that if they follow the similar model where the enrollment institution drives the money that you can generate in terms of athletics, those are institutions that I would have to believe that Dr. Dennis Thomas would have on the back channel seeking their interest, and how could they help them make it work in terms of institutions, which means now you get back up there. And if you do that, then you're able to survive as a conference, which means you continue to have the Celebration Bowl that AD was so ready to kill. Maybe it comes back and survives. And as such, you have that additional $1 million. So there are some incentives out there that can show how MEAC can continue to survive with a minimum of at least 6 teams. And then that means that they can actually grow and survive. You got to remember, while some people may have some concerns with the MEAC, this is the team that has been aggressive, that made the first moves for expansion. And in a lot of ways was right on the doorstep, the cusp of getting to 14 teams and 12 football teams, and being able to divide that perfectly geographically. There was some decisions made by Winston-Salem State, which my understanding was the changing of a chancellor and the ruling by North Carolina's legislative education board that talked about how much money could be given from students into the athletic budget, that changed the direction of what Winston-Salem State. So as we chase these variables, as you know, those things start to move in different directions. But as AD alluded into his framework, if they get to the point where they lose a North Carolina Central, along with already losing Bethune-Cookman and South Carolina State for whatever reason, and then ultimately a domino falls with Howard, then you're right. MEAC is in extremely bad shape and probably stops to exist, and all those conferences and teams are forced to go in either direction, whether that is finding another Division I conference to join or moving to Division II and joining probably what we think about the CIAA.
Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, kind of similar, but along kind of different lines. I think the MEAC, if we go down this road and they address your question directly, the MEAC is still in a good position, at least temporarily, and time is a critical factor. They still have, 3, what I call HBCU powerhouse teams, North Carolina Central, you still have Howard, and you have the fact they have, to me, time on their side, time maybe 2 to 3 years to kind of look around and approach their situation strategically and say, hey, we have maybe 2, at best 3 years. Do we look to realign with another conference? Do we look to bring other regional schools in? You don't have to make at least an immediate snap decision, but do we look to kind of phase in schools over the course of 2 or 3 years and then make their conference a little bit more sustainable. I think that's the one positive for them if this thing goes down. I'm not as optimistic that it will happen that way if FAM jumps aboard with the SWAC. If we go down this path, I'm not as optimistic that it does happen that way, but I think that is one of the positive things that they have in their corner is that they have maybe 2 to 3 years, even if push comes to shove and Bethune and Tennessee State decide to jump on board with the SWAC, they still have, I'd say, maybe 2 more years to make a good strategic decision on what is best for the MEAC. It's not going to be the immediate downfall. And to me, that's the most positive piece you could put on this spin.
All right, Drew.
I'm going to try to make it as positive as I can.
I want to hear this.
Since I would not like my press credentials revoked for a MEAC conference game in the future. But seriously, though, it's going to be tough for the MEAC to survive. And opposite of what Mike just said, I think this COVID-19 and everything else is going to accelerate the timeline of having to make immediate moves with the MEAC instead of slowing it down. And it may not be called the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference anymore, but I think for this group to ultimately survive would be at a Division II level, which you saw at in my article, where instead of this conference going down south along the eastern seaboard, that they go a little bit west and pick up teams such as a Central State, a Kentucky State, West Virginia State, Bluefield State, along with those teams in the DMV area. You don't have to touch Bethune. You don't have to touch Bowie, and then you even pick up a Lincoln up in Pennsylvania and form an 8 to 9 team conference that way. And that may be what this called, whether it's called the MEAC or whether it's called something else, for this conglomerate of schools to survive, would be to kind of go that way. You've cut your travel costs down. You still have your natural geographical rivals. So it could happen. And could pull a Bowie State in there. But I don't think Bowie State leads the tradition of the CIAA to join a dual conference. And we'll keep it with that CIAA. If you lose a Lincoln to the new Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, then you pick up a South Carolina State to still balance the conference out. And what greater rival than South Carolina State and Claflin in basketball, who are literally around the corner from each other. And I mean literally around the corner from each other in Orangeburg, South Carolina.
Enos Drew, ladies and gentlemen, he has changed the name of the conference after he wiped them out, took them out of the Division I, dropped them Division II. He just a snap of the thing. He even changed the name. You caught that, Doc? You saw how he changed the name of the conference too?
Yeah, I saw that. I said, "This is a bad man."
Change the whole name of the conference.
My gosh, Drew, you were savage. You're savage.
Man, that is cold blooded.
the level, the name, the everything. Can we? I'll let him keep the logo though.
Yeah. My goodness.
He done changed the name, but you don't have to worry about the logo if you don't. Change the vision, change the regionality. You don't even let them go down the Atlantic coast. Now they're going west. Go west, my friend. Go west.
What good is the logo going to do you?
Tradition.
Oh man, I guess one of the last points, guys, in the article, obviously, the Division II, obviously, some of the teams, obviously, we talked about moving an entire conference down, schools moving down. AD, you kind of feel like the CIAA is what it is. It seems about as stable and as set as it is going to be. But within the SIEC, there's some opportunity for growth and movement that you mentioned. And I think one of the things that I liked in your article and your map, and especially when you look at the current footprint of where Central State and Kentucky State fall. I I mean, it's almost like it's like almost like they're Hawaii in terms of, I mean, they're literally
Alaska and Hawaii.
Yeah, they're like Alaska and Hawaii in the SIAC map.
Explain this to me, and maybe what these other people. You've got two teams, the two most northern teams in the SIAC, who are in the Eastern time zone but play in the Western Division. Somebody explain it to me. I mean, when you start talking about it, just doesn't make sense. Now, you're talking to somebody who has lived the SIAC road trips as I did, and if it was one road trip every year that I hated, was the Lane and Kentucky State swing. Central State was not in the conference at that point in time, but I hated that road trip with a passion. Getting back on campus 6-7 o'clock in the morning, and these kids had to be in class at 8 o'clock in the morning. Since I was the low man on the totem pole as the coach, guess who had to do the classroom check at 8 o'clock in the morning? Exactly. So when I talk about that with passion, hating that road trip, I hated that road trip. And I'm not going to tell you over the years that I was there how many times we got snowed in one place or another, or had to move a game up so where we can leave town early so that we don't get snowed in. You know, it happens.
That's the good thing of bringing somebody like AD that actually has experience from a coaching perspective, and some things that we hadn't really talked about that we need to talk about is what does this all mean for the student athlete experience, which is another thing that the AD, the commissioners, the president, chancellor, and the boards are going to look at. You know, what does this mean from their experience? How much is this going to benefit them in terms of our decision, and how much will it lack the benefit? So it's important that you bring in that context. You do it in a funny manner, which is cool, but you're right, in all seriousness, that takes place, which is the follow-up question I have, is that you didn't share with us just how long were those road trips?
Yeah.
From Tuskegee to we would go to Lane first. The Tuskegee to Lane was about 8 hours on the bus. We'd always stop and eat, so it actually took us 10 hours to get there from when we left campus. Then Lane to Kentucky, to Frankfort, Kentucky, Jackson, Tennessee to Frankfort, Kentucky, was about 5.5, 6 hours on the bus. And we always did those two on the same road swing. Now, you get done, game's over with at 10. By the time you eat, it's about 11. It's about 10, 11 o'clock Eastern time when you get back on the bus. So now you are driving through the night, hoping that the bus driver does not fall asleep while he's driving. There have been many times where you hear the bump that while you drive. Everybody who's driven at night knows what I'm talking about. Wow. You know, stopping to make sure, stopping every 2-3 hours so he can get some fresh coffee. So, which makes it take even longer. But it was about a 12-hour trip back from Frankfort, Kentucky to Tuskegee, Alabama on the bus with the stops, everything else that we did. And you get, like say, you're getting back at campus during daylight a lot of times from the previous night's game. And hopefully you won that game so that the head coach gives those kids that day off, because there's nothing worse than having to be at practice at 3-4 o'clock that afternoon after you just got off a road trip. So
great.
It's not a fun trip. And just think about football teams have to do it. All the other non-rail sports may have to do it because they're in that Western Division with Central State of Ohio, with Frankfort, with Kentucky State. And I know it took 10 to 12 hours for the Kentucky State trip. You forgot, Wilberforce is another 3-4 hours north. I'm glad I had left the conference by the time Central State had got thrown in there. I'm done with it.
Yeah, you just saying. I understand, AD. Appreciate it. I can feel it.
With the SIT, so the obviously the current reach with Central State and Kentucky State. You've got Edward Waters coming in. There's even
and that's another one. I'm not to cut you off. Edward Waters is currently playing in the West. The most eastern team in the SIAC is playing in the Western Division of the SIAC for schedule balancing purposes. Instead of doing the sensible thing at moving one of the Atlanta teams, either Clark or Morehouse, to the Western Division, and then Edward Waters stay in the Eastern Division, where, especially so that you can create those rivalries with the Savannah State and with all the Georgia schools, you put them on the schedule with Central State, Kentucky State, Lane.
Well, let me give you one more.
I'm sorry. Don't let me cut in over the SIAC for them not being smart. And I have to. The reason I bring this up is if you don't pay attention, the SIAC will wind up finding themselves going down a similar road that the BHAC has been going down lately, where teams are just going to start leaving for financial and travel reasons.
Well, let me ask this.
I'm gonna let you go. I gotta put this out there. Let's not forget the SIAC at one point in time we talked about adding Lincoln and Missouri and Langston to their footprint.
But here's the thing: the SIAC, if I'm not mistaken, at one point there was 16 teams within the SIAC and they had 2 divisions, correct?
Yeah, they had Division 1 and Division 2, if I remember right.
That's correct.
Okay. And I've seen this from an NAIA level, so follow me here if you can. If enough teams are coming into SIC, in order to make this a more regional friendly conference, as you indicated, instead of having 2, would it be a far stretch, or what do you think of the concept of the SIC maybe having 3 tiers, in which you have where you have a tier that would include Kentucky State, Central, whoever else is Lane, maybe another school, Lemoyne, and then you have another area that would basically breaking it up into 3 groups. Now I don't know how you figure all that out for the championship purposes and all that fun stuff, but if you broke the conference up into 3 parts, you only play 10 games in Division II anyway, regular season. So maybe you find a way to figure out a method to the madness, and that it makes more sense instead of losing teams to the SIC. I mean, because it is one of the grandfathers of black college athletics. Instead of teams leaving, create a system in which maybe you have 3 divisions of 5. I'm just throwing that out there. Any thoughts on that? Anybody taking that?
Yeah, I'll jump out there on that.
Yeah.
Because of the research I've done, and then I'll let Mike follow up in regards to that. You've seen that with the WAC. WAC tried that with 16 teams. Yeah. You also see it quite a bit more often than you think about it at the Division III level with these large conferences. And they get what you call either these 3 divisions, as you said, and sometimes you hear what they call pods. And so you could create the scheduling that would work out if you do like 3 divisions or 4 pods, where you have teams that play in one of your divisions, basically play each other in pods, which will get to AD's point, which will reduce the travel concerns that you have. And then you have a formula at the end that brings them, based on records and percentages, that brings 2 teams out of the divisions, if you would, to a conference championship format. In basketball, it's not as wildly viable because you're going to bring 8, 6, 8, 12 teams, 10 teams together anyway. So you can just take the top teams out of your pods and allow them to play in a tournament. Whoever wins it comes out of it. You would have to get strategic, but there's some models that exist out there that does not really take this off the table and could make it realistic. You really would need somebody that's strategic at the commissioner office level, which I think Commissioner Moore in the SIC has the ability to do that to his credit in terms of his ideas of expansion of keeping the culture together. Now it's just taking that next step and creating those different alignments within the conference to make it work.
Yeah, just to build on that. When I was living in Atlanta and covering the SIAC, and I think at the time Dr. Lyde was the commissioner, and I think you would have to have a a more strategic approach. In recruiting with my son over the last couple of years, I've seen some models in the D3 ranks that may work for this, but I think the strategic approach has to be carefully and methodically thought out. And I don't know any other way to say this. Historically in the SIAC, I just have not seen that type of strategic approach when they look at not only scheduling the teams, but aligning the teams with prospective sides of the division. So I do think it's possible, but I do have my concerns. I think the current commissioner and the current staffing, for that matter, are better in alignment. I just think historically the SIAC has not displayed that type of strategic approach that would be required to make that type of system work.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think under the current leadership, Commissioner Greg Moore, in terms of SIAC, he has done a much better job of understanding the complexity of how you do with conference expansion. And while it's slowly taking place, I can see him doing a great job of understanding the regional alignment in such a way to take the pressure off the travel framing of that conference as it has expanded and gotten bigger. But I would say this, I think the cultural relevance of what he's able to do with the Central State and Kentucky State has made the SIAC more viable in terms of the economic prowess, particularly with the private schools and the land space that they own in terms of what the conference actually owns, which is different when you look at it from a public institution, which you see more of in the SWAC, obviously all of them, and certainly in terms of the MEAC. So the value proposition of the territory estate planning that those institutions have in the SIAC are extremely important that we put on the table when we look at all these dynamics. So all these pieces of puzzle, as AD put out there, are extremely important, but I do want to make sure that we give full credit to these ADs in these conferences, these commissioners, as well as these presidents and chancellors and their boards taking place, that they have done a lion's share of their due diligence. And having a chance to talk with many of them through our meetings, consulting with many of them on that side of the paper, if you would, doing some research behind it, I would say of an overall framework that most of the leadership that we have in front of are doing extremely well. Obviously, we can nick and pick where we want to see better, and that's what we do as alumni on one side of it, fans on another side of it, and just plain sports analysts and talking heads. We're going to push the envelope, but I would like to close my component of that, just bringing that framework that the leadership that we have taking place. Don't get it twisted. A lot of these folks are going to find a way to get this done.
AD, what are your thoughts?
I just want to kind of echo it. You know, I make fun of it, but I do that to try to downplay the seriousness of the issue. And like I said with the BA, this COVID-19 situation is going to is going to expedite, is going to push up the timeline and the time frame on some of these tough decisions that these conferences are going to have to make. Hopefully, we have the right leadership both at the on the school level, chancellors or board of directors, depending on the school, and at the conference level, that the best decision gets made for each individual school, and then collectively for the conferences and HBCU sports in general, which is, once again, the reason why I threw this article out when I threw it out. Tough decisions are going to be made over the next year. And a lot of that's going to be determined, unfortunately, by when does college athletics open back up. And I'm not talking about the big boys. I'm not talking about the SEC and the Big 10 and the Big 12 and all that stuff. When are our schools realistically going to be able to not A, open up college athletics, B, let the students back on campus? Because if the students are not on campus, you don't get the student activity fee. And the student activity fee is what we know drives a lot of our HBCU budgets for our athletic department. And then C, when the fans going to be allowed back into the stadiums so that we can experience the culture and everything else that's involved around HBCU athletics. And oh yeah, by the way, I need your ticket money too.
Let me do this, gentlemen. I'm going to bring this to a close by kind of asking everybody one final question here. I know we've gone through a lot again. Want to remind you, take a look at our article, AD's article on conference realignment by going to mybcsn.net/news, NEWS, and that's you'll see that article posted there on conference realignment. But my question to each and every one of you, I'll start with Doc, go to Mike, and then I'll bring it to you, AD, to close. Do you think there's going to be, and I'll just, we've talked theoretically, but in all honesty, honest opinion here, do you think within the next 3 years that there will be some sort of conference realignment? Will another school leave a conference soon? And if so, who is your most likely team to leave? And I'll start with you, Doc.
Yes, one of the most likely schools to leave is one of the conferences that often gets left out of the conversation, was GCAC. AD did put it in the article, so you can go read some of the comments he made there. And I think one of the intriguing going on there is the fact that they have a interim commissioner right here, right now, Dr. Kiki Baker-Barnes, certainly who could have the commissioner job in a full position, but I think there's a question in terms of the commitment of those institutions, which is going to be a very challenging question right now with COVID-19 in regards to what does that look like. And when I say commitment, are they going to get a full-time commissioner? And obviously, Dr. Kiki Baker-Barnes has her hands full, and she's doing the job admirably, but she'll let you know that they need a full-time commissioner, which means you need the presidents of those member institutions, to make that commitment, that financial commitment, to bring a full-time commissioner in, get them an office space, and allow that commissioner to have some assistance in terms of doing the work of the conference as such, so they can bring in new membership, right? And Dr. Kiki Baker-Barnes is doing such a wonderful job at Dillard University. Who's to say that she even wants it full-time, especially if you don't get that commitment, because she's doing all that work. With that said, if that commitment is not made by the presidents in the current form of the conference, which means they would get expansion to come in, changing, maybe getting some of those schools out of the Red River Athletic Conference, such as Texas College, Wiley College, Houston Tillerson, to name a few, then the fact is you'll probably see schools out of GCAC, stronger schools, looking to make a move. So do you have schools like Xavier and Dillard moving to other NAIA conferences, or do they look at the SIAC when we talk about the work they're doing in terms of significant brands at that level? So I think that's the component that I'm going to look at, because we put so much time and energy of what we said the Division I FCS schools and Division IIs are going to look at. I think that's the one that you want to keep your eyes on in the most recent feature, especially coming out, as you said, in a lot of ways, AD, Mike, and Bryan, in terms of what does this look like in the fall enrollment. First question for a lot of folks, are we going to be able to have enrollment at the levels we need to operate our institutions?
Mike, what are your thoughts? Who do you think, or what? First off, do you think anyone will make a move over the next 3 years? And if so, who's that team that's most likely to move?
Absolutely. And I think my answer is kind of similar to Doc, but for different reasons. The GCAC, and I look at it from a corporate standpoint, if you have an organization that is partially stable, meaning leadership is not permanently in place, then you open up the door to internal mobility or external mobility. And given the options that you may have present, whether it's joining another conference, maybe it's realignment, maybe it's jumping in the SIAC, which seems willing to bring other institutions in, I think you could easily see Xavier or Dillard for that reason, just because of viability and what the SIAC may have to offer. So I wouldn't put it past them. The other thing is, I wouldn't put it past other schools, maybe, given what transpires in the MEAC, that maybe a Winston-Salem starts to take, well, what are our chances at maybe moving over here to this conference? Maybe you see some of those schools also considering that as well. a lot of that hinges on what happens in the next year with this potential FAMU jump, because once one school moves, then another 3 or 4 pieces behind that will take place for sure, and that creates open spaces. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a school like even maybe Bowie State or Winston-Salem maybe even could strongly consider it. So, but my first choice is just because of pure solidified structure in the GCAC. Maybe one of those schools would be more likely, and we've talked about that just between Charles Bishop, myself, and Doc. The other thing is going back to what this COVID-19 will do for the student base. Please keep in mind, I keep bringing up the spring sports. Those are student athletes. They probably don't have full scholarships, but one thing they do is they do pay partial tuition fees. That goes to the university. Then you have a certain part of the student base that contributes to ticket sales. So if you take those out, that can dramatically impact the landscape of what a lot of these colleges and universities look like. So while you may talk alignment and while the ADs may be happy, well, maybe we do cut these programs, please keep in mind that they have the ear of the president as well. And if you start taking out, students who are spring sports athletes, maybe that impacts the sports budget, but you're taking away a significant portion of fees that are coming into the university. So that COVID-19 can dramatically impact the universities in that matter. So.
Well said. AD, your thoughts on the question?
Dominoes are going to fall sometime within the next 3 years. That was my basis of the article.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I think COVID-19 is going to, once again, accelerate those dominoes. What dominoes are going to be first? First domino that I see is happening is going to probably occur within the Big East Athletic Conference. That's going to be either a Florida A&M or a Howard making a move. I think Howard makes a move to the possibly to the Big South, maybe even to the Patriot League, as they were rumored to have made that move once upon a time. If either one of those two institutions go, I think the other one is going to come right behind them, be that either FAM or Howard. That's going to start the cycle going. It's almost like if you go back to the 90s when Arkansas left us, then Southwestern Conference. Arkansas left for the SEC. Then you saw South Carolina leave for whatever conference they would and join the SEC. And then over the next 10 years, that's when you saw all the shifting and realigning of the conferences. We're getting ready to go through a similar thing in HBCU sports. It may start in the GCAC where Doc and Mike are talking about with an Xavier coming into the SIAC or going into another conference. We talk about the stability of the GCAC. There's a reason probably why Stillman never joined the GCAC when they dropped from Division II to NAIA. The reasons why Fisk came in and left. There's reasons why Voorhees left the conference. Spring Hill left the conference. University of Mobile left the conference. Loyola of New Orleans left the conference. And all those schools that I just mentioned have left that conference within the last 10 to 12 years. There are reasons why those schools have moved away from that conference, but there are also reasons why that core group, the Dillards, the Xaviers, the Talladegas, and the Tougaloo's and things like that, have remained strong and faithful. So they're going to have to get themselves worked out together. SIC needs to tighten up a little bit, especially geographically. The SWAC and the CIAA need to continue what they do well and be strategic as they look to expand. I'll leave it to you, Brian.
Well, look, I applaud UAD for bringing this out, well sourced. I mean, anyone who outside of, I would just say this: anybody who wants to throw darts at your proposal, it is not just based on AD not having any type of background or knowledge. It's well sourced, great information there. A lot of the stuff that he brings up you can go down and read at the bottom of the article. So a lot of opinions based on history.
And did not use Wikipedia once.
No Wikipedia sourcing, which is rare for a lot of people these days. So
Professor, I can attest to that too.
Yeah, so it's a really good read, and even though, hey, look, we have varying opinions all over the place. I mean, I know one of the counterpoints, I think, to AD's thoughts here from our own producer, Roy Evans, who, he's in the middle of crafting his sort of rebuttal to AD's thoughts on realignment, and I'm sure that will be another podcast that we'll talk about, and I think that article, he's crafting that this weekend, so hopefully sometime Monday that will drop. So that might give you some more fodder to talk about, Doc, and Mike might give you something to talk about going into Tuesday's show. But yeah, I think it is definitely something to consider as you brought up a great point there at the end. It said that this COVID-19 pandemic is going to sort of be like what you mentioned in the shifting. It very well could be the shifting of things, and probably from a financial standpoint, especially if schools, if state governments don't allow institutions to get back to a full pace. If we're just not able to get back to a full environment as what we're used to, it definitely will start the dominoes and some changes that'll occur, because it'll all be about survival. And every time we've seen conference realignment, it's been about either saving money or making money. So that part is true. So Dr. Cavill, Mike Washington, along with Charles Bishop, make sure you listen to them inside the HBCU Sports Lab every Tuesday night. Make sure you can just go to Facebook. It airs live on Facebook. You can go search it out inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central. Make sure to follow Doc. What are your social media tags again, so that way people can follow you there?
Yes, you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, as you see up there. All the same name, Dr. Kenyatta Cavill. That's DrKenyattacavil. That's DrKenyattacavil.
And Mike, if people want to get at you via social media, how can they do that?
So actually, you can get to me through all the Doc stuff. If he doesn't turn off my accent.
Hey, you made me proud. You did good. Don't worry about it, Mike. You good.
So yeah, definitely.
That's
if
my
you
big brother.
Us,
if y'all don't know, so.
I like that, Mike.
So if you access through all the, I don't want to inundate everybody with all the tags. If you inundate us through inside the HBCU Sports Lab, both Charles and myself will be able to address any questions, or maybe just have another fruitful discussion about this topic, because it definitely is not going away, and it has its own unique, different turns that will rear their ugly heads in the next couple of weeks.
I love that. Mike filters everything through Doc's feed. Hey, Drew, we need to work on that. If our producer was more active on social media, we can do something like that. But anyway, just jokes. With
a little bit of truth.
Drew, you can find Drew at BCSN Drew. Make sure to find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at MyBCSN1.
And please go read the article. And Bryan don't want to take credit for it, but he's the one who threw it back at my face and said, "Hey, you need to do a better job of sourcing your stuff and go back and fix this and fix that." So I got to give Bryan a shout out too for making me go back to the lab and work even harder on this article.
Hey, for all that, Hey, for all that, I don't get credit for thinking of the Thanos situation at the end, though. I totally looked past all that, and then realized, that we had killed two major events and changed the conference name. So I think that's the thing that among all of this, I'll never forget that. So, all right, gentlemen, you guys be safe out there. Thank you for giving us your time. It's been a great back and forth. I hope anybody who's watched it enjoyed it. Share your thoughts, whether you're sharing them on Inside the HBCU Sports Lab or sharing it with us on the BCSN SportsWrap Let us know your thoughts. We continue the conversation of trying to move Black college and HBCU athletics forward. That's what we're all here to do, is we enjoy covering it. Special shout out to all of the college graduates. This weekend, I know, starts the college graduation season. So, shout out to all of the graduates this weekend and going forward. Congratulations. Hold on to that degree and make sure to do something positive with it in your community. So, again, for Dr. Cavill, Mike Washington, AD Drew, I'm Brian Fulford. For our producer, Roy Evans, thank you for watching. And we are out. Peace out.
Majesty is a premium health and wellness tea line focused on bringing delicious yet healthy tea blends to the community. Filled with an abundance of vitamins and antioxidants, we work to blend teas with exotic spices and fruits to produce scrumptious and wholesome beverages. So check us out at mymajesties.com. That's MyMajesties.com. My Majesties, an Urban Passport member.
Are you hungry?